Hello, everybody. It is Thursday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Back for our weekly Penn State chat with Seth, Engle of the Daily Collegian and the Post-Gazette. Seth, we're coming to everybody a day later than normal. We moved the college basketball show up so we could talk a little bit Duquesne, BYU ahead of the NCAA tournament, a little bit about the games happening in Pittsburgh, and I'm recording this with you. So we're a little bit later than our normal spot, but I think that helped us out because we've got some news from spring practice and a lot of things to talk about this week.
Yeah, no, we had pro day last week, so we're kind of out with some of those veteran guys, and then this week we got to see some of these new guys kind of step up, especially considering some of the new guys are these coordinators. 3 new coordinators now in the second week of spring practice, so kind of just getting a look at them, getting to talk to them a little bit. So we should have a ton of stuff to break down here.
Yeah, let's get into the pro day stuff first. I think there's a lot of interesting storylines there with Penn State prospects. I'm going to start at the top with the big possible first-round selections: Chop Robinson, Olu Fashanu. In the what did you see from them at pro day, Seth? And what do you think that they have solidified their first-round status with their work, at the All-Star games? I don't think either one of them did a ton at the All-Star games, but at the combine, and then again with pro day.
Yeah, we'll start with Olu there, who was a guy at one point, maybe projected top 3 pick, and excuse me, now we're starting to see as the draft nears, his stock is falling a little bit, and as someone who's covered him for his whole college career, it's a bit of a head scratcher because this was a guy who is maybe the most consistent offensive lineman I've ever seen. When you look at almost 700, pass blocking snaps over the past 2 years, and not a single sack allowed, like that is consistency, and that kind of speaks for itself. And when you talk to him too, this is a pro, this is a professional guy, and it was the same way when he was, 19 years old. It's the same way now. So I'm sure he killed it in the interviews. I guess the only concern right now with Olu are these injuries. He did well in the combine when he started out, and then he got a quad injury that kind of ended his day, and before kind of it was supposed to be ended. And that's left him not 100%. So he didn't really participate too much at the pro day. He put it at about 80%, but says he should be ready by the time that the draft rolls around. I'm just like, I don't understand really why, because you've seen him too. Like, why do you think Olu is dropping in some of these big boards?
Well, do you think some of it, Seth, is just maybe the way other guys are rising up especially the quarterbacks? I just think we've seen more quarterbacks mocked toward the top of this draft than I think I'm personally comfortable with. I kind of see when we were talking in the fall, there were 2 quarterbacks at the top. There was Drake May, Caleb Williams, and then there was a perceived drop-off to Jaden Daniels. There was question whether Jaden Daniels would be available to the Steelers in the 2nd round, and now he is toward the top of the draft. We're talking about guys like J.J. McCarthy in that 15 range. We're talking about Michael Penix Jr., and the one that, if you're a regular viewer of this YouTube channel, you know how much it irks me that Bo Nix's stock is as high as it is, just given that he lost every big college game he ever played in. I don't believe that's going to change in the NFL, but apparently teams seem to be willing to take some chances on him. So do you think that's kind of what it is? It's not necessarily a function of Olu falling. It's a matter of other players are getting a little bit more prominence in this evaluation period, and what always happens, I think, specifically with quarterbacks, is teams say we got to get our guy when the going gets tough in this March-April window, and everyone's dissatisfied with their quarterback compared to where they are maybe in October, November.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that especially with some of these combines and some of these pro days, like some guys that maybe weren't projected so high during the season, maybe because they went to a school that didn't have as much attention on them, are now having that opportunity to kind of rise, and there are these new fresh faces on the big board. And particularly with offensive linemen, I look at the guy from Oregon State, Fuaga, who I don't think anyone really had their eye on for most of the season. It was pretty much the 1-2 punch of Joe Alt and Olu Fashanu are your top two offensive linemen. Now all of a sudden there's a third guy in the mix who could potentially jump Olu. So I agree with what you're saying, and some of these quarterbacks too. JJ McCarthy now, rising to potentially be a top 10 pick. Like, I don't think anyone was really expecting that a couple months ago. So I guess we'll see what happens. Having covered Olu, like, I know this guy's good. If he stays healthy, if he can recover from his quad injury, this is a safe pick. This is one of the best offensive linemen in college football over the past 2 years. And he's a great person too. He's a good guy you want to have in your locker room. So that's kind of my pitch for Olu. Hopefully he doesn't fall too much.
Let's get into it on Chop Robinson a little bit, Seth. I've noticed this draft in terms of pass rushers is maybe not as deep as I think a lot of people would like it to be, given the value on that in the NFL these days. Do you think that's what that wins out and helps him get selected in the first round? And what's your read on the evaluation period that he's had?
Yeah, I think Chop Robinson is just one of those guys that's kind of he's a freak athlete that'll just kind of wow you and do whatever you want on defense. He's not built like your typical defensive end. He's not too long. He's kind of just this stocky kind of, pork chop who'll just go out there and find a way into the backfield. And he has done that, as consistent as anybody on Penn State over the past 2 years. And you're right. This isn't too deep of a defensive end class at all. So I think he should find his way into the first round. I think he's deserving of it. I think Penn State has also shown that they're able to develop some of these great pass rushers, some of these guys who are also able to flip between defensive end and linebacker, which Chop is absolutely able to do, especially considering the fact that he came out of high school as a linebacker. He's very familiar with the position. And I look at Abdul Carter, coming up this year as a guy who is going to fill maybe that same role and maybe make the same type of call and impact when it's time for him to go to the NFL.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how things play out for Chop. But I think, I still think both of them are pretty safe first-round picks in my mind. Yeah. I'd be surprised if either one fell out. And that's good news for Penn State. Have multiple guys on that night one of the draft. It always helps with recruiting in terms of prominence and stuff like that. So in that respect, I think they're set up this year pretty well. But that doesn't mean that there aren't some fallers here, Seth. I think Kalen King is number one. You wrote a little bit about him in the Post-Gazette, how his combine was not great. He was pretty slow, followed by that came following a season in which his tape was not quite as good as it was in that season when he was playing across from Joey Porter Jr. Talk to me a little bit about, what's gone wrong with Kalen King in the last year, not just in the last few weeks.
He was great and he was getting targeted, and it was kind of a similar situation to this year where you saw people stop kind of throwing to Kalen King. It was the same thing with Joey Porter Jr.
Hey, Seth.
He wasn't getting – yep.
Seth, I lost you for probably 30 seconds there. So do you just want to restart the answer on Kalen King and then I can just edit it out?
Oh, were you able to ask the question without it cutting out?
I believe. Did you hear the full question from me?
Yeah, I heard everything. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it was the video on your end then. So yeah, just start that answer over and I'll edit it out. So I'll just count you in 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, I mean, Kalen King is a very interesting kind of prospect and situation, considering he was an All-American in 2022 as a sophomore, and then this past year just completely dipped off. But I do attribute a lot of that to the fact that he kind of lacked targets. I think teams had him circled on their board and just weren't throwing to him. And that was a thing that kind of went in deep into the season. And I think that kind of hurts when you're trying to get your feet on the ground and you're trying to, make something happen and get warm. But you're really not getting the reps that'll get you there. So I think that kind of kickstarted things, right? And then just going into the combine, which was really the time to show Okay, it's not just about, me being slow and not getting, targets on the field. It's also just, I can potentially show that, you know, I'm quick and, I'm agile. And he didn't really show that. I do think that he's capable of being an NFL player because he's shown it when he was a sophomore. But, it's really about finding that consistency. And, I just don't see him being I don't see him being a first round pick, obviously, maybe a day two at best. So we'll kind of see what happens with Kalen King.
Yeah, it really does seem like his stock is more consolidating around day three. I did a little bit of a conversation about could he be a fit with the Steelers? An opposite Joey Porter Jr. kind of reunite those guys, and the consensus seemed to be not right now. At least it would be something he'd have to work into, and even a team like the Steelers that's in need of cornerbacks, may not look his direction until later in the draft that there are higher upside prospects available. So let me ask you this, Seth. Do you think he got bad advice in terms of going this year?
No, I mean, I think the expectation always was that he was going to go to the draft. We saw him at his best, right? And I feel like once you kind of reach that peak and then you dip down a little bit, it's even more of a risk to return for another year. Like, at least he has that sophomore year on his resume. And even that true freshman year, he was still a pretty good contributor to say, well, I am capable. And I think if you were to maybe look at another year, a senior season coming back, and it's another struggle, I think that could potentially hurt him even more. So I do think it was the right move to enter the draft. You can say what you want, though, about him opting out of the bowl game and that Johnny Dixon as well. With these kind of rough performances at camps and then also at the combine, maybe the Peach Bowl could have actually, helped their case against a pretty capable Ole Miss receiving corps. But, obviously they opted out and, that was their decision.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point as well. Seth, Theo Johnson is a name that seems to be rising in a lot of, a lot of these mocks. I'll be curious to see now that we're past the combine significantly, we're past free agency, for a lot of NFL teams. Is he a name that you expect to see to continue to rise and maybe be in some of these 3-4 round mocks that we start to see after free agency? And do you think he has the potential to maybe surprise some people and hear his name called earlier than I think maybe some people were expecting?
Yeah, I think Theo Johnson is deserving of a second round pick. I don't think that he necessarily showed his full potential while he was at Penn State. And I just think that was, two parts, being a part of a multi-tight end system and never truly having the offense kind of in his hands. And I also just don't think they utilized him right. This was a guy I was saying every single year when we're looking at, players who could potentially pop off and have a big season. He was always a guy that popped off to me as, okay, well, if they're able to use him as a deep threat like they've used, Mike Gesicki in the past, I think that's an ideal kind of role for him, and they just never did it. Now we're starting to see Theo, play in more of those situations, and pro day we definitely saw it. This is a guy who is a great receiver, but he's obviously, he's very stocky and he's strong, so he's able to block the run as well. And I think it's a very safe pick at tight end, especially considering, and this is the same thing with defensive ends, Penn State knows what they're doing with these tight ends. It's they got Brenton Strange into the NFL. He had a great rookie season. Pat Freiermuth, Mike Gesicki. The list goes on of some of these guys who have really built these pretty outstanding NFL careers, and I do think Theo Johnson is next in line for that.
Another name I wanted to ask you about was Dayquan Hardy. He seems like, starting from the beginning of the season, he's just gotten a little bit better. He impressed a lot of teams, I believe, with the speed at the combine. I think he has pretty great tape from that Ohio State game in particular. One of the few guys I thought was playing pretty well, other than I think he had that big penalty. But do you look at him as a guy who could also be a maybe surprise early pick for this Penn State team?
Yeah, I think Dayquan Hardy was maybe one of the most improved players, if not the most improved player on Penn State this past year. Not just at that nickel spot that he excelled at, for the past 4 seasons, but, also on special teams. Obviously, people from the Pittsburgh area know, this was a dual threat kind of, Swiss Army knife type of guy at Penn Hills, who was known for returning, punts and kickoffs, but also, being a threat on offense and, obviously stellar on defense. And this year he got back to his roots and was able to return some punts. And he was great. The first game returning punts since high school, returns 2 touchdowns in the same game. It's never been done before at Penn State. That now adds, something for NFL teams that he's able to kind of bring to the table, where it's not just, okay, well, I'm this guy who's able to play on the outside or inside at corner. I'm able to play, all over on special teams. He could be a gunner if he wants. So I think that adds, really some nice. It's a nice resume kind of heading into the NFL. I'm interested to see, how it kind of shapes up, because I think he is a little limited when it comes to playing that just a typical corner role, which he's comfortable with playing. But he also said he's open to playing some safety, so we'll kind of see what happens there. But Dayquan Hardy, I think he's absolutely capable of forging an NFL career.
Any other names on your radar, Seth, specifically from what you've seen from them at the Combine and Pro Day? I know you're a big Adisa Isaac fan. Johnny Dixon also kind of feels like an enigma to me, given that we didn't see him in the Peach Bowl. He's battled some injuries during the evaluation period. I guess talk a little bit about those guys and anyone else who's done anything to make you sit up and take notice, since I think we last went through NFL draft prospects a couple of months ago.
Yeah, Adisa Isaac is, I talk about him all the time, right next to Chop. This is a great kid. He's a great athlete, and I think he'll make, a potential Pro Bowl defensive end in the NFL. I just can't see him not having success, especially considering that his one flaw, which was his Achilles injury 2 years ago, was completely wiped. I asked him about it at the Pro Day, and he said, well, I completely forgot that he even had it. So teams haven't even been asking him about it. To me, it's all green lights for Adisa Isaac. I think he's tremendous. Curtis Jacobs is another guy that does excite me. He's just a quality linebacker. I think he should be able to find a starting role at some point in his career. But he's also just a team leader. He's a really good guy to talk to. And I'm sure he killed it in those interviews. Just kind of cares about things that I don't think a lot of other people care about when it comes to, football, whether it's on the field or off. And then Johnny Dixon is a, pretty interesting player right now to evaluate, considering that there's not much to evaluate from this pre-draft process. He was injured at the Senior Bowl, didn't play in the Peach Bowl, and has not competed in the Combine or at Pro Day. So, I couldn't even tell you, where he is maybe projected to go right now. I do think he's capable. We saw him this past season. He was great, but, not much to see, over these past few months, which are, it's a pretty important period for trying to get your name out there.
Yeah, I think that's really what this draft process is all about too, Seth. It's because you and I can watch these teams and notice good players, but sometimes I wonder how hard these NFL scouts work during the actual college football season, because it does feel like you can go down to the Senior Bowl and all of a sudden you can jump 2-3 rounds just from what you did in a couple of practices in an exhibition game, but you can play great for 12 games in college and maybe it just doesn't get noticed by people outside of this college football community. Hopefully that doesn't hurt Johnny Dixon too badly. Hopefully he still finds a way to at least get selected in the draft. But that's a storyline we will certainly continue to monitor. Seth, let's get into some spring football topics. It's the second week in a row, and this time it was Andy Kotelnicki, the new offensive coordinator, that the coaching staff has seemed to set the expectations for this wide receiving core high. You and I have talked a lot about how it just really was not ready for prime time, that was probably Penn State's biggest liability on the personnel, from the personnel standpoint this past season, especially on offense. What do you read into the fact that Andy Kotelnicki's talking up his receivers, that James Franklin's doing the same thing? Is it a psychological thing of trying to raise the bar for those guys and make them feel like they're shooting for excellence here? Or do you think they're genuinely excited about the abilities of some of these guys, now that they have Julian Fleming in the room with some guys they have coming back?
I think it's probably a little of both. It was interesting to hear Franklin talk about last week, and we discussed this on the pod already, saying it's not a talent issue with wide receiver. saying they have the pieces, and we just didn't really see that on a consistent basis last year. And then, like you mentioned, Andy Kotelnicki coming out and, basically saying these guys have a chip on their shoulder, and I think they're going to surprise some people this year. We'll have to wait and see, because I don't know. If you're a coach on a football team, I don't think you're ever going to come out. If someone says, okay, well, how do you assess the wide receivers? They had a down year last year. Have they improved at all? Like, they're not going to be like, no, they suck. Like, they're trying to kind of rally the troops right now. And this is a first-year coordinator who I do think is doing a good job so far. But, to me, it's just I don't know how much you can tell from 2 weeks of spring practice. It's nice to hear them, kind of hype up some of these guys. I know they have, a new transfer in Julian Fleming, who's been a real leader in the room now. Maybe that changed some things. But to me, you're not really going to know how good this wide receiver core is until week 1. And it was the same thing last year, too, where it was just a question mark. And it is again, how good is this core going to be? And it was not good, throughout all of last season. So we're really going to have to wait on that. But there's no way that you could possibly tell, even from a coaching perspective, how good that unit's going to be yet.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's partly the psychological and raising those guys' expectations of themselves and trying to get back to where Penn State was for so much of the James Franklin era. I think that's like the most unfortunate part of this past season was it's been such a strength of James Franklin teams, these receivers that have gone pro, and with a team that I think probably had the best chance, maybe since 2017 to make the college football playoff. You just didn't have that component in place the way you have in previous seasons. And, we're always going to have to wonder about what might have been in that way. I know Drew Allar threw at Pro Day. How did he look to you? And do you think we're going to be talking about him as a draft prospect a year from now, as I think a lot of us expected originally? Or does he have a lot to prove to avoid kind of having a Christian Hackenberg-like fate here?
Yeah, I mean, looking at him at Pro Day, he does look a little different, and Franklin touched on that when we spoke to him a couple of weeks ago. Just saying he's leaner. This is obviously a big guy, 6'5", 241 pounds. I think he kept all that weight. Basically, I think he kind of just refined his body a little bit. He does look a little leaner, but he looks good. He was throwing some good passes to Theo Johnson, and Deshaun Hamilton came back too to get some work in before an injury ended his pro day. But it was kind of cool to see Drew and Deshaun kind of connect, which is, two different generations of Penn State football. But it is interesting to hear you talk about Christian Hackenberg. And I look back at that, prior to his final season at Penn State, when some people are saying, okay, maybe this is a potential for, number 1 overall pick. And I think Drew has the potential to be that. I really do. I think he has this again. Oh. I think he has the Can you just cut that out?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I didn't know if you knew, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Drew just has the size and the intangibles to, really wow NFL teams when it comes to that, pre-draft process. I think when they look at him, they see Josh Allen. He just has to show that he's, capable of making the same plays as a quarterback of that caliber. And I think this year is a huge year for him to showcase that. But, after last season, I don't think there's any question about it. I do think Drew Allar needs at least, another season after this one. But we'll see what he's able to do this year.
Anything else stand out to you from spring practice this week, Seth? Any headlines that you're tracking?
It was kind of interesting to see Tom Allen as he just gets more comfortable leading this defense. There's a video you can find on Twitter somewhere of him just, ferociously blowing his whistle just, every second. It was just another blown whistle. And you can see like the energy in that building is different than I think it was. Not to say that Manny Diaz didn't carry himself with, a certain level of energy, but I think the mix between Tom Allen and Andy Kotelnicki now, which are just two intense figures, is really interesting and really exciting when you kind of step in that building and into the practice facility. And I think people are buying in because of it. So, I think so far things are going pretty well. I know it's still pretty early. It's only second week of spring practice, but, from what I've seen, it looks like a bit of a success story in terms of these coordinator hires.
Wanted to get into a little hoops here before we sign off, Seth. Penn State falls short of NIT status. You and I talked last week that they'd probably need to win a couple of games at the Big Ten tournament. They got the first. They didn't get the second in a tight game against Indiana. What do you think the expectations for this program should be next season? I think we agree, talked about it last week, a lot of good things this season, but, still plenty of room to improve. Do you think we're talking about a potential tournament bubble level team next season? Does that hinge on whether Ace Baldwin comes back? How are you looking at the 2024-2025 Nittany Lions under Mike Rhoades, kind of going into that year two where we really saw things take off with Micah Shrewsbury?
Yeah, obviously, everything kind of resting on the shoulders of Ace Baldwin Jr. If he does choose to come back, considering he probably does have a spot in the NBA. I don't know if he'd get drafted, but, I think that defense kind of speaks for itself. He's one of the best defensive players in the country this year. But I think the ceiling next year, at least the expectation, is to be a bubble team with maybe the ratio pointing towards making the NCAA tournament. I think they're capable. They have a recruiting class that's number 24 in the country right now. This should be a decent team if they're able to kind of rally the troops and maybe get some more transfers. I know they had a couple guys, Favor Ere and Kanye Clary obviously just entered the portal, and Bragi Gunmundson. So they have 3 roster spots that just opened up that they're able to use and go out in the transfer portal, which again shines light on NIL and whether they're able to really capitalize. But I think they should be able to make the tournament next year. I think Mike Rhoades did a great job this year, and I just really do think that's the next in line.
Yeah, and from my perspective, Seth, I'm excited to see what Mike Rhoades can do with kind of a full off season and a full deck here in terms of addressing his roster. Because if this year's roster was what he could do in a couple of weeks, I mean, he ended up having, I don't know if we've talked about this, he had a better season than Micah Shrewsbury did. And Micah Shrewsbury took a lot of those guys from Penn State that you and I were probably excited about, other than Kanye Clary. So I'm excited to see, aren't you, in terms of what he can do in terms of roster building, considering he was able to just kind of make a decent roster out of nowhere?
Yeah, no, I'm confident in what he's able to do now that he's had some time. It's so crazy to think that he built this team in 59 days. That's the exact number. He came in and just constructed a brand new roster, and it wasn't pretty at times. We talked about it last week. The loss to Bucknell was maybe the epitome of this is hard. It's hard to bring in a bunch of guys who've never played basketball before and just expect them to figure it out. But as the season went along, upset wins against Wisconsin and Illinois, 2 of the top teams in the country right now, it's pretty impressive. And I think that should be I think he should be applauded for that. And moving forward, if this is year one, I think the expectation is pretty high. And I think what he's able to do maybe in the transfer portal, now that he has that base set, and what he's able to do on the recruiting trail, now that base is set, I think there's a lot for what Mike Rhoades could accomplish.
Yeah, I think that early season is going to be huge for Penn State next season. I think it's really what sunk them this year, especially that preseason tournament down in Florida where you go 0-3, couple that with Bucknell. You turn a couple of those games around, Seth. I think we're talking about them a lot differently in terms of what they had a chance to do this season. And I think we learned in a couple other local circumstances. Pitt never came back from that slow start in terms of building their at-large resume. And I think that was a pretty good – I think it was a tournament team in terms of the quality that Pitt was fielding. They just stumbled when they, early on, and that came back to bite them. Duquesne is a good team that's now in the tournament that might not have been because of that 0-5 start to conference play. So I think early season is going to be huge for Mike Rhoades next season. Seth, that's all I got for you this week. Thanks for stopping by. Anything else on your mind before we sign off here?
No, I think I'm all good. Thanks, Adam.
Absolutely, everyone. I will be back with Paul Zeiss. Actually, the video should probably publish before that today on Thursday. So if you didn't see me and Paul talking Steelers free agency, potential other big moves that could be happening, make sure you check out that video. Please subscribe to the channel. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Help us out in the YouTube algorithm. We always appreciate that. and we will talk to you all again real soon.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.